Welcome to our deep dive into Malcolm Gladwell's Blink. The power of thinking without thinking. Have you ever made a decision, so quickly it just felt like pure instinct, that gut feeling that just tells you something is right or is wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Well, today we're going to be exploring those snap judgments, those lightning fast decisions our brains make, and how they can be surprisingly powerful, but also, really tricky.
It's true. Gladwell's argument is that our unconscious mind is really like a powerhouse.
Yeah.
It processes information in the blink of an eye.
Right.
But he's not advocating superficiality.
Right.
Instead, he's challenging us to consider how much we can actually decipher in just a mere instant.
And to kick things off, let's talk about marriage.
Okay.
I know it might not seem like the most obvious place to start when we're discussing rapid decision-making,
Right.
but trust me on this one. Gladwell introduces us to John Gottman, a researcher who can predict divorce with astonishing accuracy.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is how he does it. Forget about the lengthy questionnaires or any deep psychological analysis.
Right.
Gottman observes couples for just a short time, focusing on micro-expressions and these really subtle cues during their interactions. He calls these bids for connection.
Okay.
And these tiny moments, like a shared glance or a gentle touch, they reveal volumes about the health of a relationship.
So these bids are like a secret language couples speak. And Gottman has cracked the code. He's not just observing, he's deciphering whether those bids are acknowledged or ignored.
Exactly. And from that, he draws his predictions. So if a couple consistently misses or dismisses each other's bids, that's a big red flag. It indicates lack of emotional engagement, a breakdown of that connection.
Yeah.
On the other hand, couples who are attuned to each other's bids, even amidst disagreement, demonstrate this fundamental level of respect and responsiveness, and that's a positive sign.
It suggests that these seemingly small, almost invisible interactions actually carry a lot of weight.
Yeah.
But wouldn't our personalities play a role too?
Yes, absolutely.
Could those also be detected quickly?
Well, Gladwell explores that very question by diving into the work of psychologist Sam Gosling.
Okay.
Gosling wanted to see how accurately strangers could judge someone's personality just by looking at their dorm room.
I mean, who hasn't done a little snooping and formed an opinion based on someone's living space, right?
Right.
You see a stack of philosophy books and you think, oh, deep thinker. Or you see a mountain of dirty laundry and you think, oh, needs to get their life together.
Yeah, get it together. But Gosling took this to a whole new level with his research.
Yeah.
So he had strangers assess the personalities of college students based solely on their dorm rooms.
Okay.
And here's the kicker. These strangers were more accurate in their judgments than the students' close friends who filled out personality questionnaires.
Hold on. More accurate than their close friends.
More accurate.
How is that even possible? I mean, you would think friends would kind of have the inside scoop.
Right. That's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Gosling argued that friends are often blinded by, their existing perceptions and memories. They see what they expect to see.
Okay.
But the strangers.
Yeah.
Fresh eyes.
Yeah.
Focusing purely on the environment itself, untainted by those preconceived notions.
So in a way, the dorm room is like a mirror, reflecting the inhabitant's personality in unexpected ways.
Yes.
What exactly were these strangers picking up on? What were the clues?
So Gosling identified 3 types.
Okay.
Identity claims.
Okay.
Behavioral residue, and thoughts and feelings regulators.
Okay, break this down for me.
Okay, so identity claims, those are those deliberate signals we send out, like posters or awards. We're literally claiming aspects of our identity through these objects.
I'm a huge Star Wars fan.
Exactly.
Or I'm really into fitness.
I went to Harvard. Those kinds of things.
Right, so pretty straightforward stuff. But what about the less obvious clues?
That's where behavioral residue comes in.
Okay.
Think messy desk, an organized bookshelf, or even the types of books you own. These aren't deliberate statements, but rather traces of our habits and preferences.
Okay.
And we leave these clues behind unconsciously, like footprints in the sand.
It's like a detective story unfolding in a dorm room.
It is.
And I'm intrigued by the third type of clue. Thoughts and feelings regulators. What exactly are those?
These are the objects that we surround ourselves with to manage our emotions.
Okay.
Think comfy blanket, photos of loved ones, or even candles, to create a soothing atmosphere.
So by looking at these regulators, strangers could glean insights into a student's emotional landscape, their inner world.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is this idea of reading the environment. It connects back to Gottman's work with couples. It's all about deciphering hidden signals.
Yeah.
Focusing on key details while filtering out, the noise.
It seems we're constantly giving off cues, whether we realize it or not, and those cues hold valuable information for those who know how to read them. But does this only work in personal settings? Like relationships and dorm rooms?
Right.
Can these split-second judgments be applied to more complex scenarios?
Gladwell argues that they absolutely can. In fact, he takes us into a high-stakes domain, the medical field.
Okay.
So imagine your task with predicting which doctors are most likely to get sued for malpractice.
Okay, so my first instinct would be to analyze their training, track record, maybe patient feedback.
Logical, right?
Yeah.
But Gladwell flips the script. He presents research suggesting that simply listening to brief snippets of conversations between doctors and patients is a more accurate predictor.
Really? You're saying tone of voice matters more than a doctor's actual skills or experience? That feels unsettling.
Well, it's not that skills and experience are irrelevant.
Right.
But here's the key insight. Malpractice lawsuits are often driven by a breakdown in respect, not necessarily by medical errors.
Okay.
Patients feel unheard, dismissed, or even belittled.
So it's not just about what the doctor says, but how they say it.
Exactly.
Their tone can either build trust or erode it.
Right. Researchers Wendy Levinson and Nalini Ambady conducted a really fascinating study to test this.
Okay.
They removed the actual words from audio recordings of doctors speaking, leaving only the tone of voice.
Oh, wow.
And then they asked judges to predict which doctors would be sued based solely on those tonal cues.
So they were essentially listening to the music of the doctor's voice, stripped of any content.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the results were remarkable. Judges accurately predicted which doctors would get sued based on the perceived dominance or concern in their voice. Those who sounded more dominant or dismissive were more likely to be sued, while those who conveyed concern and empathy were less likely.
Incredible. It suggests there's a hidden signature in our communication style, one that reveals more than we might realize.
Exactly. And it reinforces this idea that even complex situations, like a medical consultation, can be thin-sliced, meaning we can extract meaningful information from just a thin slice of experience.
This concept of thin slicing seems to be popping up everywhere. I mean, think about basketball players, that seem to have court sense, or military commanders with that coup d'oeil, that power of the glance. They're making split-second decisions based on very minimal cues.
Right. It's fascinating. Gladwell even gives the example of ornithologist David Sibley, who could instantly identify a rare bird in flight.
Wow.
Based on its gist, its essence.
Wow.
He honed this ability through years of observation and expertise.
So experience plays a role too.
Yes.
It seems the more we're exposed to something, the better we become at recognizing patterns and making those quick, accurate judgments. But doesn't that also mean our snap judgments can sometimes be wrong?
Sure.
Like, what if our initial impressions are based on biases or misleading information?
It's a great point. And it brings us to a cautionary tale. The Warren Harding error.
Okay.
Warren G. Harding was elected president of the United States largely because of his striking good looks.
Oh, yes. I remember reading about this. He was like the George Clooney of his time.
Exactly.
Charming, charismatic.
Yes.
But not exactly presidential material.
Unfortunately, no. Harding's presidency was riddled with scandals and incompetence. He's widely considered one of the worst presidents in U.S. history.
Wow.
And his election highlights how these superficial cues, like attractiveness, can override rational thinking.
Right.
And lead to really disastrous decisions.
So we can be fooled by our snap judgments.
We can.
Especially when those judgments are based on superficial factors. But isn't it unsettling to think that we're constantly making these judgments, often without even realizing it?
It is. And that brings us to a powerful tool that Gladwell discusses, the implicit association test, or IAT.
Okay.
It's a psychological tool that measures unconscious biases, revealing those hidden associations we might not even be aware of. Would you be up for a quick, modified version of the IAT?
Sure. I'm intrigued, but let's make it a challenge for our listeners, too.
Excellent idea.
All right, listeners, are you ready? First, quickly categorize these names as male or female. John, Bob, Amy, Holly, Joan, Derek, Peggy, Jason, Lisa, Matt, Sarah. Pretty easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now let's step it up. This time we'll pair categories like career with male or female, and you need to sort words like entrepreneur, home, merchant, corporations, siblings, kitchen, parents.
So the IAT measures how quickly we associate certain concepts with specific categories. And what's fascinating is that even people who consciously reject stereotypes often reveal implicit biases through this test.
Like, even if we believe men and women are equally capable in the workplace, our unconscious associations might tell a different story.
Precisely. And the implications are far-reaching. One of the most well-known IATs is the race IAT, where most people, even many African Americans, demonstrate an unconscious preference for white people.
Wow. It's a sobering reminder that we're all products of our culture and upbringing. Even if we strive to be open-minded and unbiased, these hidden associations can lurk beneath the surface.
It's true. It's a crucial point. These biases aren't intentional.
Right.
It's not about labeling anyone as racist or sexist. It's about acknowledging that our unconscious minds have absorbed messages from the world around us, messages that can really impact our perceptions and behaviors.
And these biases can have real-world consequences.
Absolutely.
It's not just a theoretical exercise.
Right. Gladwell highlights a study by Ian Ayres on car sales.
Okay.
Ayres found that women and minorities were systematically quoted higher prices than white men, even when they had the same negotiating skills and credit scores.
So you're saying it's not just a matter of a few bad apples discriminating?
Right. While conscious discrimination certainly exists, unconscious bias is likely at play in many situations. These implicit associations linking women and minorities with being less assertive or less knowledgeable about pricing can lead to subtle yet significant differences in treatment.
It suggests that even when we think we're being fair and objective, our unconscious biases might be steering the ship.
And it gets even more complex when we consider the impact of stress. Gladwell introduces the concept of temporary autism, arguing that heightened stress and arousal can actually make us mind blind.
So it's like our ability to accurately read people's intentions and emotions just shuts down. We become so hyper-focused on the immediate threat that we miss crucial social cues.
Exactly. And the consequences can be tragic. Gladwell uses the example of the 1999 police shooting of Amadou Diallo, an unarmed black man in New York City.
Right.
Diallo was reaching for his wallet, but officers, in a heightened state of arousal, misperceived his actions as a threat.
This highlights the importance of training and strategies to help people, especially those in these high-stakes professions like law enforcement, to avoid succumbing to this temporary autism. But it also makes you wonder how many everyday interactions might be affected by this phenomenon. Like, think about a tense negotiation, a heated argument, even a job interview.
Sure.
Our stress levels could be clouding our judgments without us even realizing it.
It's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
And it underscores the importance of creating space for more deliberate thinking.
Yeah.
Even in those, pressure cooker situations.
It's like we need to build a buffer between stimulus and response, a space where we can pause, assess the situation, and choose a more thoughtful course of action. But what about when we do try to slow down and analyze our snap judgments? Is that always helpful?
Right.
Gladwell seems to suggest that sometimes thinking too much can actually backfire.
Yeah. That's a fascinating paradox. He presents research by Tim Wilson and Jonathan Schooler where they asked people to rank different jams. Initially, people's snap judgments aligned pretty well with expert tasters. But then they asked participants to explain their reasoning, to articulate why they preferred one jam over another.
And I'm guessing that's when things went off the rails.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their rankings became nonsensical, no longer correlating with the expert opinions. It's as if the act of verbalizing their preferences interfered with their more accurate, intuitive judgments.
So it's like we're overwriting our initial impressions with faulty logic. We're trying to make sense of something that our unconscious mind already understands.
Precisely. And this phenomenon has a name: verbal overshadowing. Our verbal explanations can actually overshadow or even distort our more accurate, intuitive judgments.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. Sometimes our snap judgments are spot on. Like Gottman reading a couple's dynamic, or a seasoned doctor diagnosing a patient based on just a few symptoms. But other times, those same snap judgments can lead us astray.
Yes.
Like when we judge someone based solely on their appearance or let stress hijack our ability to accurately read a situation.
Right.
So how do we know when to trust our gut and when to question it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think exploring that question is at the heart of Blink.
It seems we need to dive deeper into the nuances of snap judgments, understanding their power, but also recognizing their limitations.
Absolutely.
And perhaps as we delve further, we'll gain a better understanding of how to harness this incredible ability while avoiding its potential pitfalls.
Exactly. And for a final thought-provoking example before we move on, Gladwell takes us into the world of cola wars. Specifically, the blind taste test challenge between Coke and Pepsi.
Oh, this is a classic. I remember reading about how Pepsi consistently wins in blind taste tests, but Coke remains the market leader.
Right. And this raises some really intriguing questions about the role of branding, perception, and the power of our unconscious associations. It seems taste isn't the only factor at play when choosing our favorite beverage.
So there's something more going on here than just the liquid itself.
Exactly. And that something more is what we'll be exploring when we return.
Okay.
Stay tuned as we continue our deep dive into Blink, the power of thinking without thinking.
All right.
Welcome back. Before the break, we left off with a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
The Coke versus Pepsi taste test challenge.
Right.
Pepsi consistently wins when people taste blind. Coke remains king.
Yeah.
This isn't just about sugary drinks.
Right.
It reveals how deeply our unconscious influences our choices, even when we think we're being, purely rational.
Okay, I'll bite. Why does Coke still dominate if Pepsi supposedly tastes better?
Right.
Spill the tea, or rather spill the cola.
Gladwell introduces us to Louis Cheskin, a marketing research pioneer, who understood that we don't experience products in a vacuum. He called it sensation transference. The idea that brand image packaging and even the color of a product impact how we perceive its taste.
So it's the whole package deal.
Yes.
Not just the taste itself. I guess the iconic red of Coke and its association with, classic Americana play a role.
Exactly. Cheskin believed that we unconsciously transfer sensations from the packaging to the product. So Coke's branding, its history, its advertising, that feeling of nostalgia it evokes, all contribute to a more satisfying experience, even if Pepsi technically tastes, quote, sweeter in a blind test.
It's kind of mind-blowing. Our unconscious is a master puppeteer pulling strings we're not even aware of.
It really is.
But how much control do we really have over these snap judgments? Can we train ourselves to be more discerning, to see past those superficial cues and make better decisions?
Though Gladwell doesn't offer easy answers, but he does encourage us to be more aware of the forces at play. He argues that understanding the mechanics of Blink can help us harness its power while mitigating its potential downsides.
So knowledge is power.
Yes.
The more we understand how our minds work, the better equipped we are to navigate those split-second decisions.
Absolutely.
But where do we even begin?
Well, for starters, we can become more conscious of the environments we create, both for ourselves and for others. Remember Gosling's dorm room study?
Yeah.
It showed how much our surroundings reflect our personalities and influence the impressions we make on others.
So you're saying that a well-organized workspace might signal competence, while a cluttered desk might send a different message?
It might.
It's like we're constantly curating our own thin slices for the world to see.
Precisely. And this extends beyond our physical spaces, our online presence, our communication style, even our choice of words, all contribute to those rapid judgments people make about us.
It's like we're all walking, talking billboards, broadcasting our values and preferences through a million tiny details.
In a sense, yes. And this raises some really interesting questions about personal responsibility. If our unconscious is shaping these impressions, are we accountable for them? Can we be held responsible for biases we're not even aware of?
That's a tough one.
It is.
It's like saying, I didn't mean to discriminate, but the impact is still the same, regardless of intent. This makes me think about the car sales study Gladwell discussed. Even if those salespeople weren't consciously discriminating, the outcome was still unfair for women and minorities.
Exactly. And this underscores the importance of creating systems and structures that mitigate the impact of these unconscious biases.
Okay.
For example, in the car sales scenario, implementing clear, standardized pricing procedures could help ensure fairer treatment for all customers.
So it's not just about individual awareness.
Right.
It's about creating systems that promote fairness and equity.
Absolutely.
That makes a lot of sense. But let's circle back to this idea of harnessing the power of Blink.
Okay.
Are there specific strategies we can employ to make better snap judgments?
One crucial factor is expertise.
Okay.
The more we're exposed to a particular field or skill, the better our intuition becomes. Think about a seasoned chef who can instantly tell if a dish needs more salt.
Right.
Or an experienced musician who can identify a sour note in a symphony.
Right.
They've developed this deep, intuitive understanding that allows them to make those quick, accurate judgments.
So it's about honing our skills.
Yes.
Immersing ourselves in our chosen fields, and trusting that with practice, our intuition will become more refined.
Exactly.
But what about those situations where we don't have years of experience to draw upon? Are there any strategies for making better snap judgments in the moment?
Gladwell highlights the importance of priming.
Okay.
Our environment, our recent experiences, even the words we hear or read can subtly influence our subsequent judgments.
So you're saying that if I spend the morning reading about successful female entrepreneurs, I might be less likely to fall prey to unconscious bias when evaluating a woman-led startup later in the day.
Exactly. By consciously exposing ourselves to positive examples that challenge our biases.
Right.
We can, in a sense, prime our minds to make more equitable judgments.
This is fascinating. It suggests that we have more agency than we might realize. We can actively shape our unconscious influences.
To a certain extent, yes.
Okay.
But it's not about denying the existence of these biases.
Right.
It's about recognizing their power.
Yeah.
And taking steps to mitigate their impact.
So it's a constant process of awareness, reflection, and course correction.
Precisely. And it's not always easy.
Right.
We're all susceptible to these unconscious influences. But the more we understand them, the better equipped we are to navigate the world with greater intentionality and fairness.
This is giving me a lot to think about. It seems that mastering the art of Blink is a lifelong pursuit.
I think it is.
Yeah. But before we wrap up, I'm curious about something.
Okay.
Gladwell talks a lot about intuition. But doesn't there come a point where we need to move beyond those gut feelings and engage in more deliberate analytical thinking?
Absolutely. Intuition is a powerful tool. But it's not infallible.
Right.
And there are certainly situations where careful analysis and critical thinking are essential.
Like when making major life decisions or evaluating complex data sets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Blink is not advocating for a purely instinctual approach to life.
Right.
It's about understanding the interplay between our unconscious and conscious minds.
Okay.
Recognizing when to trust our gut and when to engage our more analytical faculties.
So it's about finding that balance, that sweet spot where intuition and analysis work in harmony.
Precisely. And that's a skill that takes practice, self-awareness, and a willingness to learn from our mistakes.
Speaking of mistakes, Gladwell shares a fascinating anecdote about a police officer who was involved in a high-speed chase. Despite being in a highly stressful situation, the officer resisted using deadly force because something told him, I don't have to shoot yet. He trusted his gut.
Yeah.
And it potentially saved a life.
It's a powerful example of how intuition, honed through experience and training, can guide us towards the right course of action, even under immense pressure.
But it also highlights the importance of having those systems and safeguards in place that we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
Even the most experienced professionals can benefit from structures that promote careful consideration and reduce the risk of impulsive decisions.
We need both individual awareness and systemic support to truly master the art of Blink.
Okay, I'm starting to see a clearer picture here. Blink is not just about making snap judgments.
Right.
It's about understanding how those judgments are formed, recognizing their potential biases, and developing strategies to make more informed decisions.
Exactly. And it's a fascinating journey of self-discovery. As we explore the nuances of Blink, we're essentially exploring the inner workings of our own minds.
It's a reminder that we're far more complex and multifaceted than we often realize.
Absolutely.
Our conscious and unconscious minds are constantly interacting, shaping our perceptions, and influencing our behavior.
And the more we understand this intricate dance, the better equipped we are to lead more fulfilling, intentional lives.
This deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening. But before we get too philosophical, let's ground this back in some real-world examples. Gladwell shares a story about Kenna, a talented musician who struggled to find success in the music industry.
Yes.
What's interesting is that his music defied traditional market research.
Yes. Kenna's story is a really powerful illustration of the limitations of relying solely on data and analysis. His music was unique, innovative, and really difficult to categorize. When record companies tried to test his music with focus groups, the results were underwhelming.
So people couldn't quite grasp it. It was outside their frame of reference.
Exactly. And this raises a crucial question. How do we make room for the new and different? For those ideas that challenge the status quo? When traditional methods of evaluation fall short.
It's almost like saying we need to develop a new way of blinking, a way of perceiving and evaluating that goes beyond those pre-programmed categories and expectations.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that's where the true power of Blink lies. It's not just about making quick decisions. It's about cultivating an openness to new experiences. A willingness to trust our instincts, and a recognition that sometimes the most groundbreaking ideas are the ones that defy easy categorization.
It's about embracing the unknown, even when it makes us uncomfortable.
Precisely. And that discomfort can be a sign of growth, a signal that we're pushing beyond our comfort zones and venturing into uncharted territory.
This has been an incredibly thought-provoking conversation. We've explored the power of snap judgments, the influence of our unconscious biases, and the importance of finding that balance between intuition and analysis.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear your final thoughts on Blink. What key takeaways would you leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that our minds are far more complex and fascinating than we often give them credit for. We're constantly making judgments, processing information, and forming impressions, often without even realizing it.
And those unconscious processes have a profound impact on our lives.
They do.
Shaping our decisions, our relationships, and our perceptions of the world.
Exactly. Blink encourages us to become more aware of those processes, to understand their strengths and limitations, and to ultimately harness their power for good.
It's a call to action, a challenge to become more mindful, more intentional, and more discerning in our thinking.
Precisely. And as we cultivate these skills,
Yeah.
we open ourselves up to a world of possibilities,
Mm-hmm.
a world where we can make better decisions,
Yeah.
connect more deeply with others,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately lead more fulfilling and meaningful lives.
We've been talking about, the power of Blink, but also acknowledging those moments where we need to kind of slow down, analyze, to really think things through.
Right.
Gladwell dedicates a good portion of the book to exploring those high-stakes situations where those split-second decisions can have, life-altering consequences.
Yeah.
And perhaps one of the most compelling examples he uses is the world of law enforcement.
Absolutely. Gladwell takes us inside police training.
Okay.
And he introduces this concept of temporary autism,
Right.
this state of mind blindness that can happen in those really high-pressure scenarios.
Yeah.
Remember, it's that tunnel vision where you become so hyper-focused on the perceived threat that you lose the ability to accurately read people's intentions, their emotions, the full context of the situation.
And as we discussed earlier, this temporary autism can have tragic consequences.
Yeah.
Like in the case of Amadou Diallo.
Right.
So how do we equip law enforcement officers, and really anyone in a high-stress profession, to avoid falling prey to this mind blindness? Gladwell points to the work of police expert David Fife, who advocates for creating distance and taking time to assess a situation before reacting.
Right. Fife's not saying, hesitation is always key, but rather strategic awareness.
Okay.
He argues that by slowing things down, by taking advantage of cover and gathering intelligence, officers can avoid having to rely solely on instinct in those really critical moments.
So it's about creating space for more deliberate thinking?
Yes.
Even when the situation feels urgent. It's like building a buffer between that initial adrenaline rush and the response.
Exactly. Fife even uses this example of a burglary call.
Okay.
Instead of rushing into a potentially dangerous situation, Officers should gather as much information as possible first.
Right.
What's the layout of the building? Are there any witnesses?
Right.
Is the suspect armed? The more you know, the better equipped you are to make a sound judgment.
It makes sense. Information empowers better decision-making. Gladwell also shares a really compelling anecdote about a police officer involved in a high-speed chase. Even though the situation was incredibly tense, the officer resisted using deadly force because, as he put it, something told him, I don't have to shoot yet. He trusted his gut. And it potentially saved a life.
It's a powerful illustration of how, even in the heat of the moment, we can train ourselves to resist those really impulsive reactions, those fight or flight responses that can sometimes lead to really devastating consequences. It underscores the importance of mindfulness, of cultivating that inner awareness that allows us to observe our thoughts and emotions without immediately acting on them.
So we're talking about cultivating a space between stimulus and response. That pause where we can choose a more considered course of action. But isn't there a danger in overthinking things? Earlier, we talked about how analyzing our preferences can actually make our judgments worse. So how do we strike that balance between trusting our gut and engaging in deliberate thought?
It's a delicate dance. And I think Gladwell would argue that there's no, one-size-fits-all answer. Sometimes our intuition is spot on, guiding us towards the best possible outcome. Other times we need to slow down, gather more information, and engage our critical thinking skills.
And this brings us to another fascinating concept that Gladwell explores. The importance of being wrong. He argues that the ability to acknowledge and learn from our mistakes is crucial for growth and improvement.
But how do we apply this to Blink? How do we become more comfortable with the idea that our snap judgments might sometimes be off base?
It starts with humility. With recognizing that we don't always have the right answers. That our initial impressions can be flawed or incomplete. And it requires a willingness to be open to new information, to challenge our assumptions, and to adjust our course when necessary.
So it's not about beating ourselves up when we make a mistake, but rather seeing it as an opportunity for learning and growth.
Absolutely.
This reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about creating environments where people feel safe to admit their mistakes.
Exactly. And Gladwell uses a really interesting example to illustrate this point. Improv comedy. One of the fundamental rules of improv is to always say yes to your partner's ideas, no matter how outlandish they may seem.
It's about embracing those unexpected turns and seeing where they lead.
It's about creating a space where creativity and spontaneity can flourish. Where there's no fear of judgment or failure. And I can see how that same principle could be applied to other areas of life, from business to relationships to personal growth. If we can cultivate that sense of openness and acceptance, we're more likely to take risks, to learn from our missteps, and to ultimately achieve greater success.
And isn't that what Blink is ultimately about? It's not just about making quick decisions. It's about trusting our intuition. Being open to new experiences. And embracing that, messy, unpredictable nature of life.
It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress. Constantly evolving and adapting to the world around us.
Precisely. And that journey of self-discovery is what makes life so fascinating.
This deep dive into Blink has been an incredible journey. We've explored the power and the pitfalls of snap judgments, the influence of our unconscious biases, and the importance of finding that delicate balance between intuition and analysis.
We've learned that our minds are capable of these extraordinary feats of perception and insight. But also that they're susceptible to biases and errors in judgment.
We've been challenged to become more aware of those biases, to cultivate mindfulness and intentionality in our thinking. And to ultimately harness the power of Blink while mitigating its potential downsides.
And as we navigate the complexities of life, let's remember to embrace those moments of Blink. To trust our instincts, to be open to new possibilities, and to never stop learning and growing.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Malcolm Gladwell's Blink The power of thinking without thinking.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've enjoyed the journey.
Yes.
And that you'll continue to explore this fascinating world of snap judgments and the remarkable capabilities of the human mind.